Welcome back to these lectures on the second half of Western Civ. I call this lecture Conventions in Flux because everything seems to be up in the air just before, during, and after the Great War. And that's the context, basically, that time period in the early 20th century. Significance, well, conventions are changing. And by conventions, I mean traditions. Traditional ways of doing things, traditional sources of authority. These things are in flux. They're up in the air. We're not quite sure how we're going to do things at this point because of this dramatic change. And we're going to go through a variety of categories here and just briefly note some of these changes. I don't know if you've heard the word convention used in this fashion. This is not a convention in the sense of a bunch of people gathering like Trekkies or a hardware store convention or a sales convention. Conventions here are the traditional way of doing something. And when traditions or conventions are broken or challenged, it's quite obvious, whether it's in music or literature or politics or what have you. I can remember in my own lifetime, when I was a kid in the 60s, pop music was played on the AM dial, and the songs were 2.5, 3 minutes maximum. The Beatles came out with Hey Jude, and I believe Bob Dylan came out with Like a Rolling Stone, and these were long, 7-minute songs. And radio programmers did not want to play them, obviously because of their length. But it was the Beatles and it was Dylan, so you had to play it. Suddenly you get this transformation in the radio industry where now the FM dial begins to play entire album sides, and pop music goes from AM to FM, and you get much more experimentation and variety in popular music. Those are conventions that are being changed. If you go to the movie theater, how long does the film last? Hour and a half, 2 hours? That's a convention. If you go to Symphony Hall, how many movements are in a symphony? 4 generally. Mozart and Beethoven did it that way, and we continue to do it that way. How many acts in a play? 3. The Greeks did it that way, and we still do it that way. So conventions are the traditional way of doing something, and when they're challenged, it's very obvious. So let's look at some of these. Let's look at some examples. Let's start with art. Now, you're all familiar with traditional portraiture and landscapes and what do they call them? Still lifes. In the early 20th century, you're going to have a dramatic departure from these conventional ways of doing things. I'll just give you 2 examples off the top of my head. Picasso, and you can look at some examples that we supplied for you here. Cubism, an entirely new way of depicting the human condition. The traditional portraiture is out the window, obviously. And the point of view is quite unique, if not confusing, and it certainly was confusing to many people who were Picasso's contemporaries. Salvador Dali, another Spanish painter, I believe, surrealism, and you can look at some of the examples we've supplied for you here. Now, whether you like this stuff or not is beside the point. The point is that this is a dramatic departure from the conventional way of doing things in art. Music. You can YouTube this on your own computer after this lecture. The traditional structure of classical music, the harmonics, the melody, these things, even if you have not heard a piece by Mozart, should you hear it, it will sound familiar to you because of the structure of the music. Bach and Beethoven and Brahms and on and on and on. Even if you haven't heard the pieces by these great composers, it will sound comfortable and familiar to you. Now, in the early 20th century, in fact, I think it was 1913, just before the Great War, Stravinsky's ballet, The Rite of Spring, debuted in Paris, and it caused a riot. The Parisian crowd regarded it as a cacophony, as noise. No one had ever heard anything quite like this. And again, just YouTube it on your computer now and listen to you can listen to the whole thing. You should. It's a fabulous piece of music. But in 1913, Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring didn't didn't even sound like music, and it infuriated many people. Again, basic fundamental changes in harmonics and structure in music that our ears were not used to. In literature, and I could go on and on and on with examples here. You could open up Huckleberry Finn, for instance, by Mark Twain, and at any page and begin reading, and the characters and the dialogue and the plot and the characterizations, these things would all be familiar to you. It'd be as comfortable as an old quilt. But now we're moving into the 20th century, and a couple of authors off the top of my head, James Joyce with Ulysses, American author William Faulkner, a series of novels. The Sound and the Fury is the one that comes to mind because I've owned it for 40 years now and I still can't get past page 20. I've decided that there simply isn't enough time in my lifetime to finish The Sound and the Fury, and that's no reflection on Faulkner, that's a reflection on my lack of commitment to fully engage this book. The problem with Joyce and with Faulkner is that the point of view is not clear. The characterizations are not clear. The plot is not clear. It's not comfortable. It forces you to engage the material at a level that many people simply will not do. Now, it's very rewarding if you can indeed do this, and I would encourage you to look at both books. I'm going to mention one other work of literature that had an impact, I think, on people's mentality regarding war. And that's the novel, All Quiet on the Western Front. This was written by a German infantryman who had served in the trenches in World War I on the Western Front that we've talked about. And he depicts war as an ugly, bloody mess with both physical and psychological damage. And it tends to suck the glory out of war. War is often depicted in literature as a glorious endeavor, heroic and all this stuff. And All Quiet on the Western Front tends to diminish the glory while raising the blood and the guts and the mud. And I believe it was a worldwide bestseller and probably had an impact on people's view of war and a new way of depicting men in battle. In the economy, we see changes. The traditional attachment to laissez-faire in the West, sort of letting the economy run itself, keeping government out of economic affairs. This is going to go by the wayside as we enter the 20th century. This attachment to laissez-faire is going to increasingly become quite quaint. In the United States in particular, in the Great Depression, you're going to see John Maynard Keynes, the British economist, encouraging deficit spending, that is, government spending in order to trigger economic growth. You see this especially in Roosevelt's New Deal in the 1930s in the United States. So the age-old attachment to these notions of how capitalism is supposed to work without government interference are now going to be directly challenged. In politics, of course, we see dramatic changes in the 20th century. You have the rise of the Bolsheviks, the Russian Revolution. You have Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin instituting a command economy or a centralized and planned economy. You have the rise of fascism or corporatism in Italy under Mussolini. And then, of course, you have the rise of the Nazis in Germany, and after 32, 33, Hitler will bring about sort of a new way of, a new model of politics. And, of course, with the Great Depression taking place in the 1930s, you have these alternative models, fascism in Italy and Nazism in Germany and communism in Russia. And these new models are sometimes quite alluring to other Westerners. Perhaps we've made the wrong choice. Perhaps we should look at these new ways of doing things. In science, of course, you have Einstein with his general theory of relativity. This fundamentally changes our physics, changes the old Newtonian notions in physics, or at least some of them. Einstein begins to link time and space together and the impact of gravity on time, space. This is a fundamental change in how we understand the universe and our place in it. And then, of course, on a personal level, gendered expectations are transgressed as well. You see flappers, the old newsreel footage of flappers with their hair cut short. And, of course, short hair is gendered masculine. Long hair is gendered feminine. Women begin to wear pants, and pants, of course, are gendered masculine. Skirts and dresses are gendered feminine. And here you have women wearing slacks. Women are smoking, and smoking is traditionally gendered masculine. So we can go on and on and on with these type of examples. Gendered expectations are being challenged. And of course, it's quite obvious and often disturbing when these challenges take place in public where everyone can see them. So just a short glimpse at the sort of dramatic changes across the gamut of human endeavor here with these conventions in flux. Thank you.